Too busy, I wasn't playing.
We'll call the meeting to order. Please join us as we salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next is our roll call.
Brandmiller.
Here.
Ness.
Here.
Hegland.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Majewski.
Here. Okay, that brings us up to our public forum, and first up tonight, I'm very happy to say, is presentation of our Scandia Good Neighbor Award to Lynn Moratzka. So Lynn, will you join me over here, please? Hello. I'm going to read you your proclamation. Whereas respecting and caring for others is a hallmark of the American character and central to how we as a community live. And whereas respect and care for and from neighbors creates a more sustainable, resilient community and makes Scandia a great place to live and be. And whereas Scandia throughout its history has been the beneficiary of being a community of good neighbors. And whereas being a good neighbor increases the well-being of individuals and of the community in which we live. And whereas Lynn Moratzka has over the years consistently thought of ways to enrich our Scandia community, from her key work in establishing and growing Gamble Garden Museum, to helping found the Scandia Preschool, and her work in organizing the Elam Foundation, which supports people and causes in many ways each year. And whereas Lynn has supported the Scandia community through her involvement in the formation of the Scandia Farmers Market. And whereas through Gamble Garden and Elam Church, Lynn brings to Scandia celebrations of Scandia history, Swedish culture, music, arts, food, and festivals. And whereas Lynn still keeps generating new ideas to the benefit of the Scandia community, from decorating lampposts in the fall, to decorating the community center each winter season, to meatball races and lutefisk kickoffs. And whereas Lynn has demonstrated the qualities of being a good neighbor and has been nominated to receive this award, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Scandia presents the Scandia Good Neighbor Award to Lynn Moratzka in recognition and appreciation. Thank you. Woo-hoo!
Well, thank you all, and I want to acknowledge Meredith McGrath, who made the nomination. And it's, one of the things I was taught growing up was that the most valuable thing you can have is the respect of your peers. So I thank you. And one of the new projects with Sarah and the mayor, is creating welcome bags for the people that move into the community. One of the things that will be in the bag are dollar horses, the symbol of Scandia. They'll have a little tag on it that explains what they are, but also when it became part of the Scandia logo. And I'll have to learn that from you, okay? But there's one here for you and all of the council members.
Oh, thank you.
And the staff, and the staff. And the staff.
I say keep them all, they won't notice that you don't give them to them.
There's one more. And the first half of the 20 for the Good Neighbor Bags. That's what I did during the blizzard.
Lynn made these. Lynn made these.
And also, something for those of you who like chocolate. These are chocolate double horses.
Oh.
Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to participate. Thank you
So much. I know which of the dollar horses the council will prefer I pass out first. Okay, I have another, for our public forum, I have a letter to read from Nancy Stalland of the Tigavo Homeowners Association. Dear Mayor Mayevsky, Scandia City Council members, Administrator Soltis, and Deputy Yetter. I am unable to attend the meeting this evening, but would like to have the following request entered into the public forum. On November 21st, 2017, the Scandia City Council meeting heard the Tigavo Homeowners Association request for a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit in Tigavo subdivision. At the December 19th, 2017 Scandia City Council meeting, the City Council determined that the 2 informal speed studies performed by Washington County Deputy Sheriff Yetter were insufficient for establishing baseline speeds. It was suggested at that meeting that Deputy Yetter could use a speed box from the county in the spring to gather more data on drivers' natural speeds. Therefore, the residents of Tigavo request that a speed box from Washington County be installed in our neighborhood this spring to gather more data on drivers' natural speeds once the snow finally melts, she adds. Thank you for your consideration of our request to make our neighborhood safe for our children and all pedestrians. Nancy Stelland, and her address at 19356 Meadow Ridge Trail North. Okay. Do we have anyone else for the public forum, which is the time that you may speak on things not on the agenda? All right, then with that, we will close the public forum and move on to approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And next is approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have no public hearings this evening, so that moves into our committee reports, first being from the Parks and Recreation Committee. Terry?
Mayor, City Council, and staff, have just 2 real brief updates for you this evening. At our last meeting, we talked that we sent out bids for a couple of different configurations for the tennis courts, possibly to include some dedicated pickleball courts over there. We don't have those bids back yet. I'm hoping we have those for review at our next PRC meeting coming up on May 7th. The other thing, just an update on our planning processes. We were asked to update our plans for the parks this year. We have gathered the inventory, reviewed the inventory of all of our parks. We put them on a spreadsheet so we can add and subtract information and manipulate that information in the easiest manner possible. We met and we gathered up some high-level ideas for capital improvements at the parks, not just Lilliscoven, which gets most of the attention, but of all of the park properties around Scandia. Our next steps, keeping with we have a PRC park tour to hit 9 of those sites scheduled for the PRC members on May 19th, in keeping with the running joke that assumes that the snow is off the ground for that meeting, for that tour on May 19th. And we're also working on some of the prioritization for those capital improvement ideas, most of which we're taking from the existing comprehensive plan. There's a lot of good information there that's already been worked through, and we'll take the information we get out of the comp plan in order to put forward some recommendations for capital improvements. And it'll be my intent to have something for us probably midsummer that we'll have, so things that we can execute on in the year ahead.
Great. Any questions for Terry? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you.
Pass that over. Okay, next on the agenda is the Planning Commission. Go ahead, sorry. I got a little carried away here. Sherry,
You can have 5 minutes of
can I just, I'm just trying to pass them, I'm passing them down here.
So, this is, the first item is an item related to an amendment to the zoning ordinance for the VMUB district. This came actually because of you guys and the EDA, who asked the Planning Commission to look at some options for assisting businesses in the downtown and near downtown area for a little more flexibility in sites or ownership options to help them keep their businesses going. And so the Planning Commission looked at 3 options. One is commercial condominiums, which they and the EDA have agreed it is a good option, doesn't need any changes in the zoning ordinance. It's something people can do now. The second option was to look at more PUDs as a possibility in the VMU A and B districts. And the Planning Commission and EDA both agreed that that was a good option, but that we needed to do a bit of an update of the zoning ordinance to permit PUDs in those two zoning districts. And so that was the amendment that was on the Planning Commission agenda last week. They held a public hearing on it. They did not get any comments at the public hearing. There was general agreement in the commission that it's a good option. And so they are recommending to you tonight to approve an ordinance amendment that would allow PUDs as a use in those two districts. The third thing they talked about was whether there should be a look at changing the options for zoning sizes, for lot sizes in the VMU-B district, particularly if people could do community septic systems or shared parking. And that might be another bit of flexibility to get a little more economic development going in that district. And so what they decided to do with that one was recommend an action step in the comprehensive plan to look at that when you update the ordinance after the comp plan, to consider some more variation in lot sizes in VMUB. So what you have in front of you tonight is the zoning amendment to permit PUDs in the VMUB district with a conditional use permit.
Okay. Questions for Sherry?
Would you just tell people what PUD stands for?
Oh, PUDs are a kind of development, it means planned unit development. And someone takes a sort of bigger site, and they are allowed some flexibility from the standard zoning ordinances as long as they help the city meet its purposes. So for instance, you might allow them a little smaller lot sizes than you would somewhere else, or you might allow some uses that are not allowed in the district. You allow them some flexibility from the standards in the zoning ordinance, so they can do a more creative site plan and help the city to meet its goals.
Thank you.
And they were already allowed in other zoning districts.
Yep, they were, yep. We just needed to update the VMU A and B section.
And they were in our development code section on planned unit developments. They were listed as a use within these districts. However, when you went to that code section for the districts, they were not there. So that's really what the change
Sort
is.
of
So we're
clear-
basically
clearing up a
Right.
clerical kind of
consistent.
thing, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so you'd like us to,
The recommendation from the planning commission is to approve this amendment to
Okay.
your code.
all right, is there a motion?
I would move to approve ordinance 196, amending chapter 2 of the development code for uses in the VMU-A and VMU-B zoning district.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you, Sherry.
I move we do resolution number
Yep.
04-17-18-01, providing for the summary publication of ordinance 196.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And, where did I have 196? Okay, next is talking about variance, front yard setback.
Yep. This is a request from Sean and Ashley Maloney, who live at 22331 Peabody Trail North. And they have asked for a variance to build an accessory building closer to the road than the primary home, which requires a variance on a lot of their size and situation. It would still be 100 feet back from the roadway, but it would be closer to the road than the house. The request is based on some physical features on the parcel. There's a lot of topography on this parcel. There's some nice areas that are a little higher, some other areas that are lower that would need a lot of fill. The location of their septic system and well also makes it difficult to locate this behind the house and still be close to the house and use the same driveway. And so you can see they have a very wooded parcel.
Trying to get the best video. There we go.
So the house is the sort of lozenge shape right there, and the proposed garage location is the little red building. The septic system and well are right behind the house. The planning commission talked about this one at length, about whether there was another location on this site where they could successfully build it and not need a variance, whether they could push it back further than the house. Greg Amundson argued pretty strenuously from his experience that the septic system and well location would make that very difficult, and that the only other option would be a place they would have to do a ton of fill in order to build this garage in a location further back than the front of the house. And so after a kind of a lengthy discussion about it and noting the fact that there's a lot of trees screening this from the roadway, so it's really not visible at all from the road or from the neighbors' houses, the planning commission is recommending to you to approve the variance because it meets the criteria that this really is a physical issue on this property that's unique to the property. It's not an economic issue. It is a reasonable use, and it's the minimum way that they can deal with the practical difficulties created by the terrain and the existing building locations
Okay.
on the site. They're
Thank-
recommending to you to approve a variance.
Thank you, Sherry. Questions for Sherry? Discussion on this variance?
It makes the most sense of any place on the property, certainly.
I understand the field trip was during the snowstorm, so some of it was a little challenging. But I think
Couldn't see
Greg went
much.
out beforehand.
So they said, yes, good.
And that kind of helped that Greg had gone out there before the snow flew.
Is there a motion then?
I move to adopt resolution number 04-17-18-02 approving the variance.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And that brings us to the recommended, Chapter 5 on the shoreline management regulations.
This is still in process, but we thought we'd give you an update. This is
Yeah.
something the planning commission has been working on for a long time. The shoreline ordinance is quite detailed. The DNR has a new model ordinance that has served as the basis for this. But there are a lot of differences between the DNR's model ordinance and the city's ordinance. And so we have had to work pretty deliberately through that. We also wanted the lake associations to weigh in. So prior to the public hearing, we set this out to them a couple months ahead of time so that they and their members would have a chance to look at the ordinance. So the night of the hearing at the last planning commission meeting, we had many comments from Lake Association members and officers, which is very helpful, actually, because we had left some of the decisions to the hearing to get some input from those guys. It's online if any of you want to sort of look at the current status of it. Based on the public hearing, we came down to a recommended ordinance. Now that has to go to the DNR for a 30-day review. And they will then either give us comments back and say, we don't provisionally approve this, or they'll come back and say, we provisionally approve this and you can adopt it and make a few changes. So we're in that state of waiting for them to come back to us. One of the key issues, did you bring the map at all?
I can pull it off the planning commission agenda.
One of the key issues, and I think this will be an issue for all
I
of you to
have it.
think about, is the DNR in their model ordinance allows you to regulate a pretty narrow group of water bodies, lakes and wetlands over 10 acres in size that are called public waters. Scandia in your current ordinance regulates more water bodies than that, but you don't regulate all the public waters in the city. And it's not easy to look that, so the colors up here are the yellow ones are the bare minimum that you could do in your ordinance. The ones that are yellow and blue are the ones you include in your current ordinance. And the ones in pink are public waters that they're listed by the DNR as public waters, but you are not currently regulating them. There is no clear difference between many of those and the ones that you do regulate. Sizes are pretty similar, situations are not very different. So one of the questions for the planning commission is, what are you gonna recommend that the city regulate? And based on your current comp plan and the new comp plan, and the importance that you put on managing the quality of water in Scandia, they are recommending that you include all of the public waters in this version of the shoreland ordinance. That everything the DNR has designated as a public water would have a shoreland area around it that would be managed by the ordinance. But that's a significant change. If you look at the blue water bodies up there, it'll be some new folks being part of shoreland. So it's an interesting question. Shoreland is 1,000 feet out from the lake. So that is a significant change that they are recommending. There are some changes in the definitions they're recommending. They're recommending you keep your current definition. The model ordinance has a different definition of building height than your Scandia ordinance does. Yours is slightly more conservative. And they, given all the comments we get about not building McMansions and houses looming over others in shoreland, they're recommending you use the Scandia definition. We also put a lot of pictures in the definitions that help people understand some of the concepts, which is kind of a nice thing in the ordinance. Two other things I specifically wanted to mention are the lot area and width standards and the placement of structure standards. The model DNR ordinance would let you have a minimum lot size around recreational lakes like Big Marine of 40,000 square feet. Your current ordinance size is 2.5 acres, matching the minimum lot size in the general rural district. And the DNR would let you go even further and have 20,000 square foot lots if they are served by your sewer systems. So one of the significant issues for the Planning Commission to talk about was what lot size they were gonna recommend, staying with your current ones or going to something smaller. We got a lot of feedback on this from the lake associations, and particularly with concerns about those few big remaining sites around the lake. And based on that testimony, the Planning Commission is recommending staying with the current sizes in your ordinance. Similarly, setbacks, the DNR's ordinance would let you have more liberal setbacks in some areas. The Planning Commission is recommending that you keep Scandia's current setbacks for buildings and for septic systems. So those are some of the kind of key things the Planning Commission has talked about and that will be coming to you eventually. So there'll be important things to think about, I think. Finally, the new thing we're adding to the ordinance is the option for PUDs or planned unit developments in shoreland. And that was another thing the lake associations commented on and were in favor of, because if a landowner decides to develop a subdivision using a PUD, they're required to dedicate 70% of the area within the shore impact zone as perpetual open space. So the land close to the lake gets dedicated and protected. Further back, you can have higher densities to compensate for what you lost closer to the lake. And so we got positive feedback from the associations about allowing that in the ordinance and in fact encouraging PUDs if some of those big parcels come in for future development. So those are the main changes. Wanted to let you know that, so if you wanted to take a look at the ordinance online, you'd have a sense of it, and then probably next meeting or the meeting after, it'll come back here for you in its final form.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, probably is a change, and it really is something that was driven by, the council here, is that the change in wetlands from being a uniform 75-foot setback,
Yeah.
that our setbacks would mirror the watershed district buffers.
Yeah, so it's not a uniform 75-foot setback anymore. It varies from 25 up to 100, depending on the quality of the wetland. That is another important
Right.
piece. So those are the main things.
Sherry,
But-
can you talk a little bit about the difference between the PUD and the conservation development cluster?
They are fairly similar. Your open space cluster ordinance is not, it doesn't actually require that the land right next to the lake be the dedicated open space.
Okay,
You would negotiate with someone who came in for an OSD, and you'd probably ask them to, protect some of the stuff next to the lake, but the DNR's PUD thing, it's an actual requirement in new development that 70% of the shore impact zone be dedicated as a conservation easement.
could someone come in and want to do a cluster development with Lake Shore?
Yeah, we haven't required PUDs on Lake Shore, so someone could come in with that option instead. And then they don't have to go through the whole tier analysis, which is a challenging part about the DNR's PUD ordinance, is figuring out these, they have like 3 or 4 tiers going back from the lake, and each
Yeah.
one is allowed a different density, and it's a challenge if you haven't been through it.
Why would someone choose to do the PUD then, rather than the cluster development if they have?
Because they could get more density with a PUD.
I think the drawback from that, though, is they're giving up really high-priced lake lots
They are.
that they don't want to give up.
Yeah.
So it would be tough for a developer to, say, dedicate all that lake shore when there's a ton of money sitting there.
When I've seen people do it, it's been partly because there are wetlands close to the lake
Sure.
shore, and then it's a little easier for them to
Mhm.
stomach it, or their sense is the people buying into their development would really like something a little like a Tigavo, where the stuff next to the lake is shared by everyone. And so even the people back in the 3rd and 4th tier have some good
Sure.
access to the lake for recreation, and they market it that way. But it's a challenge, and depending on what somebody was feeling in terms of the number of units they'd like to get out of it, they might decide to do an open space development instead, if they didn't want to get maximum density and to do multifamily and some of that kind of stuff.
Was there any talk with the planning commission of requiring PUDs around Lake Shore?
We didn't talk about that. In fact, in the Mississippi critical area, which you're not part of, but that's the area, the part of the Mississippi that runs through the Twin Cities, has brand new rules as of last year. And it is a requirement that if you're within the critical area and you're doing a new development of 20 acres or more, that you have to dedicate 55% of it as conservation. You don't have the option to do a cluster where you dedicate something else. You must, it's
Mhm.
virtually telling you have to do a PUD.
But
But the
but
planning commission
did
did
not
not
discuss
talk about
that.
It would be fair for you to talk about it, though. It's clearly where the DNR wanted to go in the critical area. I think they haven't felt they could push it as hard in shoreland throughout the state.
So is there a reason that the planning commission didn't talk about it? Or did it just not come up, kind of?
I'm not sure why. Neil, do you have any sense?
No, I don't even think it occurred to them.
No.
It didn't come up in my recollection, so. it's-
No, I think they saw it as more of an option thing.
Okay.
But it would be fair for you to ask them if they thought about it or if it's an issue they want to go after.
Okay, any further questions for Sherry?
No.
All right, thanks very much, Sherry.
Thank you.
And that brings us to our staff reports, and the first one is building official. Neil, you want to talk about that?
Let me bring it back up. Hang on. Building official, you can see we've got, 27 permits totaling $12 million. The biggest portion of the permits, and I think I referenced that in my staff report, are the permits were pulled for the elementary school improvements. And those totaled about 11 million, a little over 11 million of that. So that's, the biggest component there. We still continue to see, roofing and siding permits come in, but the number has slowed down considerably.
Any new bills?
No new additional new home constructions.
Okay,
Are those net income correct?
93.4 for the.
Or 81 for just last month?
Yes,
Okay, holy cow.
it's a big permit.
That was the school one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, that was for the building and the electrical.
Mhm.
Okay, then to our police department report. Officer Yetter.
Evening, Mayor and Council. First off, I'd like to say that last week we had the DARE graduation, so I just finished up our 10-week training with the sixth graders. We had 41 kids, and thank you again for speaking. The mayor came and spoke to send off the kids to next year junior high, so that was kind of a good thing we had going last week, so real fun thing, and thanks for letting me continue to do that with the school. It's highlight of my job right now, so it's really fun, so.
And the school is very appreciative of it
Yeah.
as well, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a good thing we have going. I know a lot of schools have phased it out, but the kids love it, so. Not just say April 28th, there's a drug take-back day for the whole county. That's at the service center. It's always there, but she designated a date, thought I'd just kind of pass that on. Snowstorm was a mess. We had, I don't know how many different off the roads and unreported, and it was just one to the other, so, as Public Works knows, so. Just working with Neil, catching up on a lot of ordinance violations. Seems that spring's coming and the complaints are coming in, so just kind of working through all those, getting people into compliance. I'll touch on the speed box. We've tried to put it out twice this winter on different warm occasions, and it dies right away on us, so once spring comes, we'll actually get that out and get that back. I left the message to that lady who sent the
Good.
email out, so.
Okay.
And just working through, we got a new RMS system that's been coming for like 6-7 years, so we're, got a new one going. We're getting all trained up on it. They don't have a go live date, but it's kind of a big deal for the county.
What system?
RMS, it's a whole new computer system. It's pretty much an information sharing, how we get dispatched, or how we track all of our calls, have all of our information, through fire, EMS, police. We have our system in our cars, but then this whole system, how it transfers like our information from tickets to every call we go on, just a new updated software, which is it's been very hard to do to kind of link all three different entities together, so. And all different PDs, they'll all be on the same one, so. I don't know too much about it, not
Okay.
big tech guy.
We'll
but I
wait.
know the chief probably knows more than me since he's working with the fire department, but we're getting all trained up on that. I don't know when that comes, but otherwise we had a couple different kind of unique arrests. We had a call for DWI on St. Croix Trail. It was like, I think it was a complaint from Stillwater, followed it up, but one of our guys got it, which was kind of good. And then I had foot pursuit a couple weeks ago of, I was investigating a complaint of Barton's gravel pit from trespassing, and I went to talk to the guy, and he ended up fleeing from me, jumped out a window, and we got him, it was fine, but he had a bunch of drugs on him, which was the reason he was fleeing, so.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. Any other questions?
Questions?
No.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
Okay, and Chief Hines, our fire report.
Good evening. You have our report in front of you. We were supposed to do an event at the Girl Scout camp this Saturday, but that got canceled, so surprise, surprise, huh? We were lucky, people in Scandia were paying attention, because we didn't get called out once during the snowstorm.
It's
So
really good.
it was quite a surprise. But otherwise, unless you have any other questions.
Any questions?
Well, how long was, I'm trying to find the name, John Bauer been on the,
Oh, yes.
Just 3 years.
it wasn't very
He's
long?
kind of
Wasn't
new.
very long.
Yeah, I don't think I even know him.
2.5 years.
Okay, all right.
He moved out of the area.
Oh, is that what it was? Okay, all right.
Thank you.
You'll be here to comment on the May fire contract later, all right?
Okay, and next, our Ryan engineer report.
Mayor, City Council, apparently when I was writing my report, I knew a storm was coming, but I did finish my sentence in the last bullet point into the 2008 street project. Well, we were set up to start cleaning again at the end of the month, but obviously that might be pushed back, but we have that addressed in the contract, so no issue. We'll get to it when we can. Just in addition, I just found out some news recently on Washington County's project, so they are still moving forward with the County Road 52 project, which will go from 97 down to 95. That will be done before Taco Days, so no conflict there. They did have to hold a project back on County Road, County State Aid Highway 3, because both these sections of pavements went from basically a mill and overlay to full depth pavement replacement. So on County Road 3, still in 2018 construction, they'll go from County Road 4 up to Old Marine Trail. And then in 2019, as their budget allows, they'll go from finished County Road, County State Aid Highway 3 or Linda Avenue from Old Marine Trail to the county border north. So just breaking County State Aid Highway 3 into two-year project.
So it'll split basically at the monolith.
Yeah.
It'll split where?
At the Swedish monolith?
Oh, Old Marine Trail up that far, yeah. Okay, any questions for Ryan? All right, thank you very much. Next, our city attorney report.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The few things I was going to mention to the council, Ryan actually mentioned in his memo, and these are things in the new legislature that we're watching that could be some issues. I think the proposal to cap wireless application fees at $3,000 for city costs, and you have your right-of-way ordinance later on in your agenda tonight. I've worked with other cities that had sort of an escrow cost of $5,000 that they're looking at, so that would be in violation if that goes through. And then the potential requirement to have construction retainage is the word I'm looking for, released before the project is officially done. That may provide thoughts on that. That would disincentivize basically someone to maybe finish up the project because they have the retainage given to them. So
Did you say it's out of the House bill?
that one
But
doesn't look as
It doesn't look like it's moving
what's gonna
anywhere.
happen.
okay,
Yeah.
so the
No
Senate was still the
hearing's been
question.
no
No
hearing's
hearings.
been
Yeah,
scheduled.
which is good.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing too, 9D and 9E are your bond items tonight, and I sat in on the rating call that Neil had with the rating agency, and I don't recall too many times in my career working on these things where it's flipped from a sort of private negotiated sale with your underwriter to a pure public bidding sale. And the reason for that, I think, was the really good rating that you got from Standard & Poor's. A double A rating for a community of this size with the tax base that you have is pretty remarkable. So that's something to definitely feel good about.
Great.
So in the past, we've placed small equipment certificates with a local bank. So this is kind of a nice larger stage for you to be on with a pretty good interest rate. So those
Excellent.
are my thoughts.
Any questions or comments, Randy? All right,
Yeah, one
Uh,
thing,
yes.
it's maybe of interest to everybody, Andy. Update on White Bear Lake. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right, thanks.
I can't remember the last time we had a sort of like a post-trial motion. I can't remember if I mentioned that at the last meeting or not.
Mhm.
Steve's nodding yes. And so we've currently entered into the situation where the Department of Natural Resources is likely going to appeal the whole ruling to the Court of Appeals. The city of White Bear and the town of White Bear can join in on that because we were parties to the district court action. And we're talking about that right now, actually next week at a closed session. But the interesting thing that's going on is the DNR has now changed the groundwater permit terms and conditions basically to impose a lot of these onerous district court rulings on the cities around the lake, which not only are White Bear, but Hugo, Matamidi, and the others. And so, in Stillwater even, and St. Paul, because the St. Paul Regional Water Service is within the 5-mile loop around White Bear Lake. And so the DNR has changed the permit. There's an appeal process to say that what the DNR is putting into this permit is arbitrary and capricious. We're going to appeal that through an administrative law judge, etc. So the irony of it is that we're appealing something the DNR is handing down to us, but the DNR is appealing the very thing that they're putting in their permits. So we have sort of a friendly adversary in the DNR right now, but nobody knows how this is gonna shake out. But so since we've appealed, we mean the city of White Bear Lake have appealed the new DNR permit requirements, then that has put a stop to any the city doesn't have to do any watering restrictions, for example, right now. That stops until that appeal is figured out. But the biggest stat that the White Bear Lake City engineer said that stuck in my mind is that there has to be residential watering restrictions in place until the lake gets to a certain level, and I can't remember exactly off the top of my head what that level is. In the last 60 years of lake measurements, the lake has not been at that level for at least 41 years. So if you take the court's order literally, for those 41 years, there'd be outright watering ban for residential watering. So that doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So we're gonna try to figure that out in the last part. I'm just talking your ear off because I've been living a lot of this. But the last item is that the legislature itself is perhaps going to pass a bill that is going to say to the DNR that everything's on hold until the Court of Appeals rules in probably early 2019. So then you have a legislature moving in and kind of overruling a court decision, which is interesting too. So the city's actually hoping for that to happen, but
Is that lake going up at all, or is it staying the same, or is it
I think it's
going
going up.
It's,
Yeah.
if I might, it's way up from where it was.
Okay.
It's within 2 feet of where it had been before, so.
up? From ordinary high, or?
Yeah, yep.
Really?
Yep, it's gone up quite a
Well, that's
bit.
incredible, yeah.
Yeah.
Due to the watering ban, I'm sure.
It hadn't been yet.
I better stop talking or else I can go
Yeah.
on for a while.
Okay, thank you very much. Public Works, Adam.
Mayor, City Council, submitted my report. A couple of interesting things on there, as you well know. We had a total of 17 inches in March, and we surpassed that in April. So, very interesting. We had actually been patching beforehand, so we'll continue to patch now once it warms up and continue on that path. The one significant thing I think that's a great contribution to our city is that STS has now finished the majority of Lily Scogan Park as far as buckthorn removal, until we can actually find the true boundary lines on the east side of the park. I held them back from that because I didn't know exactly where they were until we can get a survey out there in the spring, so.
And STS being sentenced to serve.
Right, says to serve people.
Mhm.
They did an excellent job. The person I've been working with has been excellent. They did a really nice job out there. Now it's gonna be up to us, the Public Works and other people in the community to help keep that park the way it is now and help it thrive better without buckthorn and natural plant material replacement.
Questions for Adam? Thanks very much, Adam. That brings us to Neil's report, City Administrator.
Yeah, really two main things. One of the things I know Andy referenced the bond rating that we had. Just for some context, we did get a AA bond rating, which is really quite good. Just for for your reference, the best you can get is AAA, and that's considered prime quality. Anything from AA minus to AA plus is considered high grade. For the sale as an investment. And anything in that high grade range really is, there's a very strong capacity to meet, for the city to meet its financial commitments, and that differs from the highest rating by only a small degree. So I think, we have been very, conservative. Seems like most of the questions that came up were with regard to transfers. Some of that were past accounting practices where the levy that was used for the local road improvement fund was treated as a general fund, levied in the general fund, and then transferred over there. That came up. Then also the size of our transfers of excess fund balance came up. But I think the city's, cash position and the fact that even in talking about the issue that we were looking to, put in a substantial contribution, that we have a fund balance policy that provides adequate fund balance, and that we've been, we have sufficient resources there, were some of the reasons that that resulted in that rating. Because typically you would not find a rating that high unless you had a community with a much larger commercial or industrial base. So that was great. Couple small things they talked about is in terms of budgeting, long-term financial projections. You know, obviously we've done that for the capital budget, but we have not done it on the operating side just because there hasn't been that much happening. But we can do that, you know, when we look at the budget in terms of that work session. You know, the other things that they've talked about are a formal investment policy, you know, not that we really need one. I think typically that addresses, you know, whether we're investing in marketable securities where there's potential for loss, but with everything being in CDs that are fully collateralized, that risk isn't theirs. But I mean, that's an easy one for us to do. And then the other thing they mentioned was a lack of a comprehensive debt management policy. And quite frankly, you know, we could probably memorialize what we have, but we have not issued a significant amount of debt. So those are easy things to deal with.
Good.
You know, on and beyond that, I included in the, you know, my report, kind of a budget calendar for moving forward. You know, we'll start departments working on these in June. Pretty much committee reviews in July. We'll try to pull everything together kind of for that first higher level view or discussion from the council level at the August work session. And then go on from there. You know, on and beyond that, any other questions on?
Want to talk about our testifying today and
I
tomorrow?
will let you do that.
Well,
if you would like.
We, you have it on there, that's why, for the legislative session. So we did testify, Neil and I testified today before the House Committee on Taxation, Finance, which moved the bill forward. And then tomorrow morning, we are testifying before the Senate, similar committee in the Senate. And we are hoping, now what they're moving forward is that part of our proposal that removes that 10-year, or that 8-year requirement for land and ag preserve, so that if that easement, the easement that we have coming through Arden Johnson's land, would not have to sit there for another 7 years before we could have access to it. And that's the piece that's moving forward. The money piece that we had asked for, so far there hasn't been anything going on with that. Any questions? Okay, so that moves us up to general business. Starting off with the report on the audit.
And Ryan Schmidt is here from Schlennerwenner.
The moment you've all been waiting for. As Neil said, my name is Ryan Schmidt. I'm an audit manager with Schlennerwenner & Company. This is maybe the third time, maybe fourth time I've presented to you, so I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. Most of you should have 3 reports in front of you. One of those is the big book, the audited financial statements. There's a smaller blue book as well called the Report to Members of Governance. And then there is the clear covered small packet. That's kind of a summary of the other 2, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So if you take that clear covered packet and you flip into the first page, we're going to kind of start by talking about the audit process just at a really high level. And I'm going to move through some of these slides pretty quick, so feel free to interrupt me when you need to. So basically the audit process consists of us coming in and getting the city's records, getting all of your financial data for 2017, and then we perform various procedures. So these procedures consist of inquiries with the city staff, various analytical procedures, and then a lot of tests of details. And based on the results of these procedures, we come up with an opinion on whether or not your financials are fairly stated. And that opinion that we rendered this year was an unmodified or a clean opinion, which is the best opinion to achieve. Moving on to the next page, the next couple pages talk about the information that's summarized in the smaller packet, the report to members of governance. This is basically required communications about how the audit went. If we had any unusual transactions that we saw, or any strange accounting policies or alternative treatments, this is where we would let you know about it. But we didn't identify anything strange or unusual like that we need to report to you. The one thing that is on this page is that there is one estimate in your financial statements that we consider to be significant. And that would be the calculation of the net pension liability and asset that is done by PARA at the state level. There's a lot of actuarial estimates that go into that number, and then a small piece of that number is broken out and put onto the city's financial statements as your net pension liability. So So you don't have a whole lot of control over that, but it is basically an estimate. Next page talks about odd results a little bit more. This is where we would let you know if we had any issues dealing with the city staff or difficulties, if we ran into any disagreements, or we had to go for an outside consultation. Didn't have any of those items. Okay, following page, we talked about audit adjustments. Normally, audit adjustments for us are a pretty substantial part of the audit. Usually we come in, we assist with a lot of the year-end adjustments, we do a lot of corrections. You know, a lot of the cities we go to have maybe 20, 30 audit adjustments during the audit process. When we come here, there's actually very few audit adjustments. We have maybe just a couple, they're very minor. And that's actually pretty unusual with our city, so it's really nice to see. And what that tells me is that the numbers that are in your accounting system and that are in the reports that you're getting on a month-to-month basis, they're likely very accurate, because if we don't have any adjustments at the end of the year, that means the numbers you're getting throughout the year must be good. So that's nice to see. Okay, so as part of the audit, we also look at your accounting policies and your procedures, and if we see any weaknesses in your internal controls in these accounting policies and procedures, we have to report a material weakness or a significant deficiency for these. Now, the only internal control weakness that we have reported for you is the same one we always have, and it's the one that we've got for basically every city we audit, and it's the lack of segregation of duties. And it's simply because a city your size doesn't have enough staff where you're able to break out every phase of each accounting transaction to a different person and have it segregated to what's considered the ideal level. So it's probably something you'll never be able to get away from given your size, but it's something good to be aware of, that you have a limited number of people involved, people that have access to basically your entire accounting system.
But it has presented no problems.
Oh, no problems so far that we're aware of. But, you know, it's something we need to communicate to you so that you're aware.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next page, we have our report on Minnesota legal compliance. This is something the state makes us do as part of the audit. They give us about 6 or 7 checklists, and we go through these and we make sure you're in compliance with all the various Minnesota statutes they want us to check on. And we didn't have any instances of non-compliance that we identified. So that's also good news. And with that, we'll get into the numbers a little bit here. So for starters, we've got the general fund, and we've got a bit of a trend analysis here looking at 2013 through 2017, and then we've also got the 2017 budget on there. So the blue bar is your revenues each year, just for the general fund. Red bar is your expenditures, and then your green bar is the fund balance. So if you see this fund balance increasing over time, that means that the assets, the fund balance is growing over time. If you see a decrease, and of course, fund balance is dropping. So one thing we see here is that your revenues have consistently exceeded your expenditures every year. And this kind of plays into something that Neil was talking about earlier with how every year you put your local road improvement levy into your general fund, and then you transfer a chunk of that out into your capital project funds each year. So that's why, for the most part, I believe you have a gap here most years, where you have revenues so far in excess of your expenditures. You'll see that your fund balance down at the bottom right-hand corner from 2016 to 2017, your fund balance actually dropped off just a little bit, and that is because of the transfer out of your general fund and into your local road improvement fund of about $523,000 in 2017. So even though your revenues exceeded your expenditures, then you took some of that excess and transferred it out. Comparing 2017 to your budget, your revenues exceeded your budgeted amount, mostly due to building permits being well in excess of what you budgeted, and then expenditures were pretty close to budget. So you ended the year with a fund balance of about 1.7 million. Looking at the next page, a way that we oftentimes like to take a look at this is looking at your general fund unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your annual operating budget in your general fund, so as a percentage of your annual expenditures. And another thing Neil mentioned earlier, you actually have a minimum fund balance policy and that policy is to have approximately 35 to 50% of your annual expenditures sitting in your fund balance. So your policy is 35 to 50. You can see at the end of 2017, you actually had about 93%. So you're well in excess of your minimum threshold, and that trend, you can see the graph, the trend has been an increase from year to year. So you've had an increase in fund balance each year. Okay, and then the next page kind of reflects the same thing. If you don't like fund balance, this is just cash. This is just straight up what's happening with your cash over the past 5 years. Okay. Following page, we've got your other governmental funds. We've got your funds that are considered major because they have more activity in them. This is your equipment replacement fund, your local road improvement fund, and then your debt service fund, and then your other more minor funds we've wrapped together into non-major on the right-hand side. So once again, revenues blue, expenditures is red, fund balance is green. Equipment replacement fund, not a whole lot of activity in here this year. You did have a few equipment purchases. You had a plow truck purchase. Something that's not reflected in your revenues here because it doesn't qualify as a revenue is you had proceeds from your equipment certificate that you issued for $160,000. That's what financed that red bar, your expenditures there. Local road improvement, that blue bar consists primarily of taxes. Not much for expenditures there, but you can see you've been growing your green bar, that fund balance, over the past few years in anticipation of your upcoming road projects. Also that transfer from the general fund each year that I talked about, that's also been growing that fund balance. So that's another reason it's as high as it is. And debt service and non-major, not a whole lot to talk about there. Pretty standard. Next page has your capital project funds. So it's got your capital improvement fund again, your equipment replacement fund, and then also your local road improvement fund. And this is just your cash balances in each one of these funds. So your capital improvement and equipment replacement, cash is maintained pretty steady over the last 5 years. And like we talked about with that local road improvement, you've started building up your cash in anticipation of your upcoming projects. Okay. Next couple pages talk about your enterprise funds now. So we have your 201 sewer enterprise fund. Looking at the last 5 years here, the red bar is your operating expenses, and then the blue bar is your operating revenues. So something we see going on here is that each year your operating expenses have actually exceeded your operating revenues. And as a result, that purple has been negative each year. That's your change in net position each year. So 2016, you actually had an operating loss in this fund of about $16,000, and you ended the year with a net position of $851,000. Keep in mind, this does include depreciation expense and non-cash items like that. So in a couple pages, you'll see that despite the fact that you have a decrease in your fund balance, the last couple of years you actually have had an increase in cash. Next page looks at your uptown sewer enterprise fund. Not a whole lot going on here. There's very little activity in this fund. You basically break even every year. Had an increase in net position of about $200. Ended the year with a net position of $160,000. And then here's that cash trend analysis that I talked about, where you can see your uptown sewer doesn't have much cash in it. That's just kind of trending down near the zero mark. But that 201 sewer, I think you did some lift station control panel upgrades back in 2015. That's the drop off you see there. But then since then, you've been building your cash back up over the past 2 years. Okay, and finally, we've just got a couple slides here that wrap everything together. So we've been looking at all the individual funds. Now we've got your government-wide assets, which is all these funds wrapped together, and long-term items like capital assets and long-term liabilities are wrapped in on the next slide. You can see over the last 5 years, you've had a steady trend of growth with your assets growing each year. This is largely due to your investment in capital assets, roads, infrastructure, things like that. On the next page, we have your total citywide liabilities. Something you'll notice here is that red bar, debt, your non-current liabilities, has been dropping off pretty consistently as you've been paying off your debt since 2013. A slight bump up this year with the issuance of those equipment certificates, but still a trend of paying down your debt. And then that green bar that appears in 2015, that's when that new standard was issued where you have to put that net pension liability in your books. Something you don't really have any control over there. I'd recommend mostly ignoring. That's all I've got for you. Any questions?
You appear to be in good shape.
Oh, yeah.
I would say so.
No, I mean, well, I guess the next slide here, we do have one more slide that talks about the long-term debt increasing again, but same information as the previous slide. But yeah, as Neil was saying, your double A rating, I mean, I think we're very financial health. I certainly don't have any concerns whatsoever. The audit always goes very smoothly with Neil and Colleen, and no complaints.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
And,
You know, I have to give kudos to Colleen.
well, I was gonna just do the same thing.
Well, go ahead, you do it.
Well, no, I mean, I think, you go ahead and do
Yeah,
it, but I
I
was
mean,
saying
you
the
know,
same thing.
she has worked hard on it, has been very, very diligent and conscientious, and asked questions, and I think the depth of questions that she's asking me now, you know, show when you hear Ryan's comments about minimal number of adjustments.
Right.
It's kind of raising that awareness level, and she's done a spectacular job. I think this time the auditors barely spoke to me at all. I was feeling lost in my closet back there, but Colleen has done just a wonderful job handling things.
I mean, really, thank you, Colleen, because I think it really does reflect well on you. And I know that you've also said that about him, how much you appreciated what he has done for you as well. But thank you. Okay, that's nice. Did we really have that done last year?
But no,
This report like
no,
this?
it's a very, very nice report.
It's great.
Yeah.
I understood more tonight than I've understood for a long time from this guy.
Well, you know, if there's ever anything you want changed or something, you know, you want to see less of or more of, we're certainly open to tailoring it.
That was really nice, thank you. Okay, so that brings us on to the awarding of bids for the 2018 road construction project. And who's gonna talk about that?
That's a Ryan.
That's Orion.
Mayor, City Council,
Oh, sure it is.
let's
Oh,
keep the good news rolling because
Gee.
we certainly got a really good bid, so. Tonight, we're here with the bid results for the 2018 street improvement projects. Recommendation is to award the project to Park Construction Company with a total base bid of $3,732,404.50.
Ryan, how much have we been anticipating?
Well, let's just say 5 bid items of theirs is 1.4 million less than the estimate. So when you know, kudos here again to Neil, you know, who pushed for one project instead of breaking this into two like we, you know, started talking about. But when you look at some of their unit prices, especially in these 5 items that we're talking about, you haven't seen pricing like that since 2006 or older.
Well,
So when you get out on these rural roads and you can go, you know, and a plant right down the road, it's all mirrored up very well, you know, very ample time to do the plans and specs too, so the documents are easy to follow, but putting it all into two projects and basically having 26,000 tons in one job versus typical street projects around here, somewhere around 3,000 unless you're on highway or county road, so certainly your quantity are high, so you know, you're here for doing a lot of work, and everything worked out perfect in the bid, so.
wow, really
And
impressive.
got a lot of expensive storm sewer being fixed too, but you don't see those costs because how good a street road unit pricing we got. So a lot of things being fixed here on this project. You know, this is probably our worst of our worst areas in town because you got not just the roads and the driveway culverts, but you got some significant drainage structures down 199th and the deep ravines and the size of those things, and a tremendous amount of guardrail. There's over $100,000 in guardrail replacement. So, but overall your bid is way less than
Yeah.
what we estimated, so
Good news.
you can get to.
So is this partially, is it the result of our bonding for the road so that we could do this big project this year?
The planning,
Yeah,
which has been several years in the works. And then, you know, as the snow melts, we'll do further review and potentially prepare a change order to add, you know, within state statute, not to exceed the 25% to this project, and trying to capitalize on the unit pricing that we have gotten here with our construction company, so.
when you look at bids like this, is there, I assume you take in, or can take into consideration the validity of the company?
And they've done a lot of work in the region for Chisago County, for Forest Lake. So they're, I mean, it's not a new company.
Do cities ever say, we're gonna go with someone who's got a higher bid because they are more reputable?
That's, you're kind of threading a tough rope here from
Should I
perspective on.
talk to our legal on that one?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of case law about that. A lot of it revolves around, you know, we got our bid in 1 minute past the deadline, but we're way under, you know, that sort of thing. But then also determining who is the lowest price, but then who is the reputation and that sort of thing too. You know, you automatically have to do that. In another one of our cities, we just went through that where the contractor at issue was actually suing the city on another unrelated project, and they were way under the lowest bid for their current year street projects. So the discussion was had about, you know, this is, you know, there's a reason why they underbid that perhaps, and it was kind of a fake bid or something. I wasn't really involved in that too much, but that's kind of where you get into that. I don't know how, it wasn't really that close, was it, to have on the bids here, I don't think. Yeah,
The one where,
Million
two, one or
I
two
guess
are
two were
close.
kind of close.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but if council's ever tread into that territory,
So when you get into some of those very technical projects, or you have very strenuous deadlines, sometimes you take a different approach on how you bid the project out. Maybe you have pre-qualifications, pre-bid meetings that they all have to attend, that's written in your documents, and therefore, or you have a best value bid where you have scoring within, you know, maybe it's,
Okay.
cost is obviously one factor, meeting deadlines is another factor, you know, whatever criteria you set, but, you know, typically like a road project like this, you do your traditional public bid. You know,
Okay.
for the process that we.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's just curiosity on my part.
Do you need a motion on this one?
Yes.
Is there a motion
I move that
to,
we award the bid for the road construction project to Park Construction Company for $3,732,404.50.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you. That brings us up to the drainage and utility easement for the replacement of a culvert on 199th Street.
So this, we didn't wanna bring this forward unless, you know, for some reason the project was way overbid or wasn't awarded, until project award. But this is necessary to replace, 8-foot by 5-foot precast box culverts down at the bottom of 199th there, just west of Trunk Highway 95. So all documents within, have been discussed and presented to the property owner. They've actually executed signature on their, item, basically, because we are obtaining a permanent easement. I believe it's state statute, but we just do it as a formal process anyways, to bring it forth to the city council to approve, the permanent easements, because in some cases you're purchasing those. This instance here, you're obtaining it for $1.
You need
Okay,
action on that too?
yeah.
Yes.
All right.
And it's just to add that, so the agenda says permanent, but then you also have a temporary one in here.
Yeah, yep, sorry.
And they've already done the hard work of signing it.
So it needs to
There is
say
a
both.
diagram in the packet showing the difference between the permanent and temporary, so.
Okay, so is there a motion then to approve this?
I move we obtain easements at 16723 199th Street.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that brings us to discussion on municipal advisory services agreement with Northland Securities.
Right, as Andy mentioned before, I mean, typically, if you're going with a smaller issue, or if we did not have a credit rating, you would typically go to a company like Northland, and there are a few others, and they would go out and pretty much negotiate a deal for you, the best thing. But given the size of the issue and the bond rating, my discussions with Northland is that we will probably get a better interest rate by just taking it to the market. It is a very, they will, for credit quality, very, very high-grade bond. So, the agreement would be with Northland to provide their services with regard to the marketing and the sale of the bonds, and then post sale support. Their fees, as would bond counsel's fees and a number of other fees, be paid out of the bond proceeds.
Does it say what their fees are in here somewhere?
Yes, it does. $21,170 under compensation. Go the other direction.
Sorry.
Okay.
There you
I
go.
see it. I see it. Okay. And we need a motion on this as
I
well.
move to approve the financing plan as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that is E as well, or not?
Nope, that was
Okay,
D.
that was D. So now we're talking about the financing
Financing plan. We had originally talked about issuing about $4.5 million worth of bonds. Based upon the low bid, that number is probably too high. One of the things that we've talked about that is available, to us to take advantage of the low bid is that we are able under state statutes to, based upon the unit prices in the bid, increase the contract amount not more than 25%. Knowing that we have roads that we were looking to do in 2019, 20, and 21, I think, with the, as Ryan said, we haven't seen prices like this since 2006. I think it's advisable to, pretty much max that out if we can.
Oh, absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah. So, with that and with, the engineering fees and other underwriting and other costs of issuance, we're going to be somewhere in the $5,200,000 range. So I talked about this with Jessica at Northland, and her recommendation was that we shoot for, it's an odd amount, but the $3,890,000 in issuance. And this will do a couple things for us. Number one, when we looked at our 5-year road improvement plan, we had some funds kind of in there, what's going to happen to our debt, because our goal was to keep our property tax levy somewhat constant. And number one, this would reduce our debt service by about $43,000 a year. The other thing in here to make that plan work that was in our capital improvement plan, we were looking at, and obviously it's subject to council approval every year, a 5% increase. Mm-hmm. This would eliminate the need for that also. So that if you project this out at the end of our 5 years in 2022, it would actually reduce, based upon what we had talked about, our property tax levy for local road improvement fund, public works, and debt service for these projects by $130,000. The other thing that it will do is it will allow us to retain a little bit more of our cash position, and to then, what that would enable us to do is to look at other projects, as we, start looking, where we were looking at projects in, 2021 and 22. Some of those may be able to be accelerated and paid for cash a little bit sooner. our original estimates, and, it's in there in yellow, where we were looking at after our 2020 projects, we had about a $200,000 cushion, and that was including this 5% increase. So this is going to give us a little bit more room to look at planning, and those roads right now, this project is to take care of the roads that are poor and very poor, but hanging behind them are ones that are Ryan has rated as fair, and it may be able to allow us to start working on those a little bit sooner.
Right, it's really good.
But those would be separate projects that we'll review at a later date.
Yes,
Okay.
so all of this would be, this is kind of the plan we have in mind, but what we'd be looking for is approval of this plan, which would call for the issuance of debt of $3,890,000.
Questions for Neil?
And
Ryan?
then we're adding to that to make it to 5 million, is it?
Yes, yeah, we're using our fund balance.
Right, okay.
Just a clarifying question, Neil. So in the finance plan, it has $1,100,000 of cash on hand to cover a portion of the
We have more than
construction
$1,100,000.
costs. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But I mean, so, I don't know if I formulate this question right. Has that changed with the bond amount, or has that kind of stayed constant, that?
We would, if the project had come in as anticipated, we probably would have used about $2 million of our funds. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's another good piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Substantial.
Yeah, and our carryover balance going into there is going to be, is about $1.4 million. So we're in pretty good shape, and at least for this project, we had, as I said, we had great bids, and might as well take advantage of them.
Absolutely. Any further questions? Okay.
I move to approve the financing plan as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
And nice job, Neil and
Yeah,
Ryan.
okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
Absolutely,
yes.
And
Thank you.
I think I really appreciate, council's efforts on this, because when we talked about our capital plan, this was a big step. And I think the other thing that, the message came from the council was to get Ryan started quick.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we wanted to be ready to go early in the season. And I think, so everything came together. You want to bid as early as you can to get preferred bids, and everything just happened to work.
Good work.
Despite the snow.
Great.
Yeah, the season should have already started, is that what you're saying?
All right, moves us on to the next, ordinance 197, electing to manage its right-of-ways.
Andy?
Yes. Now I have about 15 tabs open. Yeah, find the right one. So the council is, you've seen this a number of times at your work sessions, I think in February and March. And so I don't have too much to add, further to add here, but this, as it got, and I wasn't at these work sessions, but I think as it was presented, it started off as really being new for small cell wireless facilities and micro wireless facilities, and that all flowed out of the 2017 2017 state legislation that basically revamped the statute on those items. Then something the council, I think, talked about at your work sessions was having a more comprehensive right-of-way ordinance, and to me that was a good idea. It made a lot of sense. There was some back and forth with Ryan and Neil as to what to add to the right-of-way policy and the ordinance about different actions in the right-of-way, like driveway permits and engineering standards and that sort of thing. So those were added as articles, basically 2, 3, and 4 to the ordinance, and that added maybe 4 or 5 more pages. But now you have one place that you're looking at for these items. Your ordinances are set up, they're not codified, so they're basically ordinance number 1 through whatever we're up to now. And so I think it makes more sense to put everything into one place. And so I think this has been vetted pretty well by staff, because we had to get our heads together quite a bit on what additional items are going in here besides the small cell wireless facilities. Now, I don't think, Neil, we've had any applications or anything pending with small cell wireless at this time, but everything is in place under the statute. And by November 30th of last year, was the deadline for a co-location a lease agreement that cities had to have in place with pending applicants. Well, you have had no pending applicants, so we have a form of what that co-location lease agreement will look like if they want to co-locate on some sort of public post or something, and we're ready to go with that whenever it happens. And more of our cities that are denser, like White Bear Lake, they've had plenty of discussions already with the big wireless companies, and we've had to deal with those lease languages. So if it comes into Scandia now, you can use that experience to kind of help move things along here. Now they might, of course, cap the application fees at $3,000, depending on how that goes in the state, but we'll handle that when it comes. So.
Talked about recommending that city approach the county and MnDOT personnel to coordinate their right-of-way application process. Has that been done yet?
It is not.
And that's something we're also dealing with in Ramsey County, the same situation. In a lot of the cities, obviously, when you have county roads and state highways, the city obviously has an interest in what those right-of-ways look like, but you have no legal standing to really mess with that. So collaborative approach is what we're trying to do. We just haven't seen, I guess the thing that's been surprising to me is there hasn't been a rush to do micro wireless agreements so far. At least I'm not hearing about them.
Any questions for Andy?
No, the report is nice with the highlights and that. It really spelled it out well. And I move we adopt resolution ordinance number 197.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Great, thank you. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Glad to see it all in one place.
Can we have a
Exactly.
resolution for summary publication then?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that brings us to the MnDOT and the cooperative landscaping agreement.
Right, we've been proceeding down this line, and we're finally at the point where we can execute an agreement with MnDOT for the landscaping. The agreement has them encumbering $8,000 for the materials. That's their estimated cost of the materials. This agreement kind of spells out the terms and conditions. Basically, we buy the materials, they will reimburse us. We will get the materials installed, which is pretty consistent with what we talked about. It gives us the authorization to work within their state right away. And, we've had, as we've talked about before, we have had conversations with the property owners, without objection to these. There are, obviously the city will maintain them, but when you look at the nature of the planting beds and the size of those, I don't think this is going to be, a major undertaking. And I mean, hopefully we can get some volunteers to take care of some of this maintenance too.
We also need volunteers to plant them.
To plant them,
Yes.
also.
Okay,
So what you have is you have an agreement, and more importantly, as a part of that, you have a resolution that would authorize the mayor and myself to execute the agreement on behalf of the city.
so is there a motion to approve resolution 4171804?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And that brings us to removing the conditions, the CUP conditions from Hawkinson Business
I'll
Park.
tee this up and then we'll pass off to Andy. For the sale of the 21150 Ozark Court North, one of the issues with it is in the multi-tenant building, there was previously a conditional use permit for a chiropractor's office that was recorded. The people who are seeking to buy that did not want that to be on their title. The chiropractor's office has been gone for a number of years, so this is a matter of how do we clean up the title. So Andy prepared the resolution that is, hang on. I'll load this up. Has prepared this resolution that would revoke the conditional use permit. One of the things in here, of note, and one of the bases for revoking it is at the time, the chiropractor's office was required a conditional use.
Mhm.
With the last change that we did for the village mixed-use A and B zoning district, it is now an allowed use and
Right.
does not require a conditional use. So, Andy, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. And the word revoking a CUP, I mean, it sort of sounds drastic, but it's the typical process to do if somebody violates a CUP, and then if that's the case, they sort of have a property right granted by the city and the ability to do a business. That's regulated by the conditions under the CUP, so they can come before a public hearing or what have you and sort of argue their case as to why the CUP should not be taken away. In this case, we don't have that situation. The state statute in play that deals with CUPs talks about that. A CUP is typically in effect as long as the conditions agreed upon are observed, but nothing in that statute prevents a city from enacting or amending their zoning ordinance to change the status of conditional use, and that's what you've done here in 2016. You amended your zoning ordinance to basically make the CUP requirement moot for these types of facilities. Now, whether the building is changed to a different use that has nothing to do with medical or dental or chiropractic, it doesn't really matter because the cloud on the title, so to speak, is the chiropractic CUP use. And it's just, it's not applicable anymore because that's been taken away, and it's an allowed use in the VMUA zoning district, and that's VMUB takes on the same allowed uses that a VMUA district has. So that's what the meaning of the resolution was. I didn't get this into the pack until today, so it wasn't too long. So that just does away with the old resolution that you did in 2011. This does have to be recorded at the county to negate the one that was recorded back in 2011, and then that will do it.
Okay, any further questions for Andy? Otherwise, is there a resolution? Is there a motion?
Adopt our resolution number 04171805.
Second.
I'll stay out of this one.
Okay,
Yeah, makes sense.
all right. We have a motion, we have a second, all in favor?
Aye.
With one abstention.
Do you need a motion for the second part of that?
No.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Then that brings us to the fire services agreement with May Township.
This, we've worked on this to try to reflect our discussion at the council meeting. Chief Hines helped fill in the blanks in terms of what responses what items we would respond to, what services we provide. But I think more importantly is we put in there some specificity as to where the numbers come in. So, the changes that we have are really on page 2, where the number of fire calls to the town service area over the last 3 years, referencing that does not include recalled calls or other calls for response outside of the city area. It's going to be, responses in May Township versus responses in Scandia. Market value, we said, as determined by the most recent Washington County property tax records for all taxable and non-taxable structures in the town service area. And then for households, we have as determined by Washington County using the dwelling type information in the most recent Washington County property tax records. So, in here we're going to use the same, basically, same data set as we, I think is where we called it. What we would be looking for tonight is to approve the form of the agreement. And once May Township approves the form, then we can work on the numbers and get back to the council for the final agreement. I think Andy had some changes to the master agreement based upon other agreements that they have, if you wanted to make any comments.
Yeah, the things that I was looking at, and of course I go to the worst case scenario, but on, for example, page 2 has some paragraphs there, subparagraph A and B, and that was in the template anyway, but I added some language to that based on other ones that I've done where, if something went wrong in May Township from the Scandia Fire Department doing something there, or there's property damage or an injury or something, and it's not under the gross negligence of the department, or intentionally inflicted, of course, then the city shouldn't be liable for that, because you are undertaking a service to the township. You should have, and the fire department should have the discretion as to how and when to fight the fire without being second guessed and then possibly sued or something like that. So that's an example of that. And I also wanted to add in a map on Exhibit A of the document just to show exactly what the service area is. Of course, if you have a large fire, there's probably mutual aid that the fire department will cover anywhere. But just because we need to know the data set from the county that is on page 3, and then so that kind of gives a visual depiction as to what service area is. So we'll add that as we go forward here. I also work with the city of Bayport, and they have a fire department that serves Oak Park Heights, and then the 2 townships around there. So that I got to call that language into here a little bit, fill in some of the gaps about just making sure there's no second guessing or any liabilities coming to Scandia Fire Department, because you're undertaking that service provided to them. So that was my part of it.
Did we not have that in our last contract with them, those things that you just mentioned now?
No.
I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So the map would basically
We got away with
outline
it.
the street
Mike, you did okay.
Yeah, that's my envision. Yeah, it would.
Okay.
All right, so you're looking for
Approval
approval of this form.
And
Form
then, so I think it'll come back later.
Yes.
So if there's some dispute or something, disagreement about the numbers that are added into it, then we can work on that further
Right.
without being held to this vote.
Okay. So is there any further questions or else a motion to approve?
Yeah, price-wise, it appears to be just about the same. And
I think
if
when
it
we looked at it
shakes
based
out-
upon the numbers as we best know them, we're within, I think the last year we were charged $34,000, and it's probably going to be $1,000 one way or the other.
Okay.
Well, I move that we approve the form of the agreement with, for May Township Fire Services.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Oops, question,
Yeah,
sorry.
Chief, do you go to this, or it appears to be
I think
good?
it's good, like we talked about, I don't think there's a whole lot of dollar change, and I think adding in a little bit about liability and responsibility is probably a good thing.
Any further questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? And that brings us to discussion on closing the parking lot at Wind in the Pines. So you want to kind of tell us,
I think, where we left off last time with regard to, at the work session, were comments from, that, we had questions for Andy about what liability might, inure to the city for trespassing, damages, or anything like that, where people access the property through the parking lot. So if we can at least start there.
Not used to talking so much during the meeting here.
We've got more questions.
yeah, we've got more, are you just getting warmed up here?
So, we've been talking about this, for a long time now, and I wasn't at the specific work session earlier this month, but saw the discussion questions and then corresponded with Neil about some of the more specifics of it. So I've had a chance to research this question about liability, and with some other attorneys in our office, work with some other cities on the same question. We're all in agreement that the liability risk to the city is very small for something like this. Because a few reasons, and Neil pointed out on an email today to me, and I hadn't taken this into account. I mean, you have other access points to this private property from not just the Wind in the Pines, but from the DNR land, or points south, or where have you. I guess, or even over from Wisconsin if you go that way. So, in order for the city to be tagged with some sort of liability, someone would have to show that we sort of embolden that behavior by not undertaking a task, or undertaking a task that sort of funnels people onto that property from the park property. And given everything that we've done, which if we needed to, we could itemize a list of actions Public Works staff has taken, and general city staff to show that, we're not pointing this out as an access point to private property for them to trespass or get injured or to fight or something where the landowner's insurance would be nicked or something like that. I'm confident that all of those items have been done by the city. You've asked MnDOT to take the sign off of Highway 95 that the parking lot is there. You've made the map at the parking lot a little more generic as to where the trails are. And when it was nice last fall, I drove in there and looked at the map and kind of walked a little just to see what all this was. You've put in signs on once you get into the park itself, and then once private property begins, you've obstructed the trail. You're working with Brandon and staff to actively patrol that area and to make contact with people. So there's more that I'm forgetting. So that all comes into play. The other thing too is I thought about this too. If you have more of an urban park or just a regular city park and people are recreating on that, and then they maybe veer off course a little bit and it's not clear where the park ends, or it is clear but they fall in a hole or something on private property after they've accessed the park. In that situation you wouldn't have liability either for the obvious reasons. And so I don't really see a difference in this case. So that's the main liability question. I have other things to say about if you want to institute some sort of a permit program or something, but I can stop there.
Yeah, I think in discussing this, we had started having conversations about some kind of permit process, and one of the things Andy noted, and I mean, he provided a draft of an ordinance with a section on parking based upon, what I believe it's in Bayport for a lakefront parking lot where they do have a permit session, and maybe you can comment on how that works and how that would be enforced.
Yeah, the parking lot in Bayport, they have a dock, a boat launching spot at the dock there by the Anderson Windows headquarters, basically. And there's a permit program that Bayport has developed that people get a permit for the boating season. I can't remember what the price is off the top of my head. And then they have to get that through City Hall and put that on their car. And if during a patrol by somebody, whether it's county or city, but normally city police department, if they don't have that in there, then they're liable to be ticketed and prosecuted. I mean, it's a misdemeanor, so that technically means the highest price would be 30 days in jail and $1,000 fine. But I mean, it's just a parking ticket, really. And so that has really shown sort of who's in and who's out as far as those permits at that place. This is a little bit more isolated, obviously, of a place. And so the question for the city would be, is this something that is enforceable and something that you want to enforce, and would it make any difference with people heeding the rules to get a permit and parking there with a permit and then using the park responsibly?
Anyway, yep.
Yeah. Then I asked one of our prosecutors kind of how would that work as far as a permit program, who would it go against? And it sounds like, and Brandon might have some other comments, is that the citation would be against the owner of the vehicle. If the owner was not the one who did it there, then it's their problem to figure out if they can get that citation dismissed and get the real person on the citation. So now there also are some cities who have a different enforcement process for administrative citations, and that wouldn't necessarily go into the muddled county court system, but instead could be dealt with an administrative fine. And we don't have to my knowledge, an ordinance in place that really sets that up for these types of things, but that's something else to consider down the road too.
So in Bayport, is it just city residents, or can anyone get a permit?
Anyone can get it. There's a lower fee for city residents.
Questions, Randy, about?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Maybe to be a little clearer, couple of questions that came up. One is, if somebody is trespassing, leaves the park, goes on the house's property and injures themselves, is Mr. House responsible in any way for those injuries?
For the most case, and without straying too far because I don't exactly know his arrangement, but for the most case, he would not be responsible because unless for some reason there is an obvious injury that will occur, like if there's a ravine or something that he hasn't.
If he maintains his property,
Yeah,
good
yeah,
repair,
that's fine, yeah.
then he's fine.
He's fine, yeah.
Okay.
Good and reasonable repair, like a reasonable person would do. I mean, some properties, you're gonna have a ravine in there, and so
We
they
do
can't be responsible for everybody coming in there
Right.
and falling, yeah.
Which he does have.
Right.
In conjunction with that, does the city have any responsibility to try to keep people off of his property?
This, I wouldn't say, put it that the city has a responsibility, to keep people off property, his property, because, you know, in my mind, there are, well, someone can tell me, I guess, who knows the property better than I, but there are boundaries. The trail that you use, it is, there's a sign that says you're leaving park property and you're going onto private property. So, does the city have a responsibility to build a huge fence or a wall or something? I don't think so,
Okay.
in that case.
It is,
Yeah.
just trying to get, and I guess I was a little confused as well, because I was doing some research on trespass law. And maybe I'm not reading this right, but I thought the way that it's written says that you're guilty of trespassing if after being asked to leave, you don't. So just the fact that I'm on somebody's property doesn't mean I'm trespassing unless I'm asked to leave and refuse to.
I think that's true under the theory if a tree falls but no one's in the forest, does the tree fall? Because,
Yeah.
you know, somebody's, and I think that in this case, the property owner is asking them to leave, you know, when he catches people, so to
Yeah.
speak.
I think one of the questions, I mean,
That's if it's not properly posted. So you can be cited
Right.
upon,
Yes, yeah,
like if
signs
it's
and that.
properly posted and you go onto somebody's property
You're trespassing.
and that posting is like them telling
Yeah.
them and asking them not to go on my property. So if it was not posted and any property that's not properly posted,
Yeah.
somebody walks across it, the owner comes out, hey, you have to get off my property. Yep, sorry, I didn't know where the line was. So that sign is kind of him asking. So just a clarification.
okay. Because I guess I'm not a legal expert, but when I read this, it just says that if I have property, I should post it, and there's requirements for posting it in certain ways, but in section 7, which follows the posting requirements, says you're guilty of a misdemeanor if you intentionally do a number of things, including not leaving when asked or returning within a year after being told to leave. So, I don't know. Either way, I think we spend an awful lot of time and energy trying to fix a problem for one person, which doesn't seem to be much of a problem that the city should be involved in. So,
Any other comments? Where we want to go with this?
What's the fee schedule on the permit for this?
We don't have one at this point in time. If you wanted to go that direction, I mean, it could all easily be, I mean, there's no reason we even have to charge, quite frankly. I mean, you can just get a free permit, that if you're lacking that permit, you know, that you could issue a citation.
so what are we accomplishing with the fee?
I think, well, are we required to have a fee?
No.
Okay.
Well, forget the fee.
Right.
What are we accomplishing by having a permit?
Right.
The one advantage with the permit that I would see is you're ticketing the vehicle.
Yeah.
Whereas it is now, Ryan has to, or Brandon has to go, yeah, I'm looking at Ryan and saying Brandon. He has to go find the person.
Right.
And then ascertain that that's the person whose car was, on city property. So, I mean, it does make, enforcement a little bit easier in that regard.
So would we be asking Brandon to only ticket vehicles that aren't permitted and
then respond to complaints.
not go to
not go down
Fine-
on the
Fine
property.
people?
Yeah, if a vehicle is there without a ticket, does he then go start looking on the property for trespassers?
Well, that's up to my discretion.
That's his
Yeah.
discretion, yeah.
Yeah, depending on the situation. I guess one more thing with the permit, just be my question, is it just a permit to park, or are you gonna do a permit to access? Because,
It would probably be a permit to park.
okay. Yeah, so anybody who, if you have somebody, a Scandia resident, and then you have friends from anywhere, you can bring them on. You don't
Right.
have, okay.
And if you have because you have a permit to park, doesn't mean you're not gonna go trespassing on the property.
Well, that's true.
Mhm.
Okay.
I mean,
I
that's
guess
the,
part of my concern is that, Brandon's our only officer that patrols the area. And if he's out chasing people, trying to look for people, it could be hours that he's out there roaming around this property when,
So that's not any different than it is now.
well, I'm saying, what I'm wondering is, would we be better served as a community if he didn't go looking for trespassers and spent more time patrolling other areas of the community?
I agree. I think that's the way it should be. That's why you ticket the car.
So by
You don't look for
ticketing the
person.
car, that gives us
Yeah.
more of that leeway.
It also doesn't require the prosecutor, the county prosecutor, to deal with the issue.
Now, Brandon did say at the meeting last time that he feels it more effective when he finds a person and talks to them
Yeah.
and educates them.
This is a good interim step. If it's a continuing problem, we'll go one step further.
Okay.
I have a question. Would the permitting process allow opportunity to educate the person about the boundary issues? Like when you get the permit,
I would think so.
these are you get a map or
Yeah.
something.
A
these are the
map, right.
boundaries, So
Mhm.
they
Good
have
idea.
been informed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, I'm not gonna trespass. I'm gonna stay at home.
No, just
Well-
to give them the information.
it's just an
Yeah.
educational piece of it, yeah. And they know someone's watching too.
The rules
First
of the
time.
park, it's
Right.
like,
First time.
And if it-
like
if it's-
entering the Boundary Waters canoe area, you get a permit and here's your map and you don't do this, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That type of deal. But I got a question, Brandon. Has the game warden ever been called in to help on this? Because there's been talk about hunting season trespassing.
Yep, so I did talk to Scott, because Scott Arnson's our game warden. We haven't had any issues of like hunting or any of that illegal activity, because that's not allowed on that park.
Well, we were just told by the homeowner that he had 10 people in there. during
They
deer
weren't
season.
hunting though. They were just
Oh, they were
wandering
just-
around. They weren't wearing orange or anything,
Oh,
he
okay,
says.
okay.
Yep, so that was a concern there. I have talked to the DNR, and I think they reposted their property line, because that trail does go onto, it goes from
DNR.
ours onto DNR land,
Mhm.
And then,
and then onto Housen's property.
Right.
So I have taught, I have put the ball back in their court numerous times, and when I talked to them about, the new SNA just south of there, I'm forgetting the name, but, I advised them of the problem, that it needs to be reposted, they need to do more, and, they said, well, they had some, things that we should do, like put trail cameras up, and I said I wasn't gonna do that because they're just gonna get destroyed, so I have put that back in their court, but
Okay.
Scott, no, I've showed it to him, I've advised him of the issue, I've even advised the park service rangers of the issue, just cause it do have some adjoining property with them as well.
Well, maybe there's no hunting allowed in the DNR or the city park, or
Correct.
is there?
Yep,
There's not.
none,
So maybe the game warden wouldn't be the guy.
yeah,
Okay.
that's why Scott
All
didn't
right.
really show any interest, the park service didn't really show any interest.
Okay.
So.
So they don't, trespassers don't directly access his land from our land. They
Oh,
go
yeah.
through DNR land.
It's like
There's a
right on the
single point.
corner of
Yeah.
the three, so it depends where they do it. If they take the proper trail, which has been marked before, you stay on the high trail, they take a left, I don't know, I guess I have to show you on a map. But if they
Okay.
follow that, they could access from DNR, if they follow the top, they could access from ours.
Okay,
Well, the two properties come together at a point.
right.
So the only way they actually could cross from our property to his is to go to that exact intersection and step over it. Otherwise, they would have to go either onto the neighbor's property or onto the DNR property to get to his. But it's,
Yeah.
they're coming from our place, and how they're getting there, I think, isn't
How much,
as important.
how much extra red tape, cost, staff time, legal time is this gonna add to us if we start doing a permitting system for this? A permitting system which may not even solve the problem.
Andy, how much experience do you have with administrative citations? Because, I mean, there is a difference between, a citation for a misdemeanor, which means, that process is going to go through our prosecutor, versus an administrative citation, which, you would not, it doesn't, basically, it's a local fine, that you would, is not gonna go, quote, you're not gonna have a criminal record for it. It'd be more like, what you would think of traditionally as a parking ticket.
So the guy from Wisconsin that comes over and gets an administrative ticket,
And doesn't pay it,
walks away, you're never gonna see him again.
or Minnesota.
The people from Wisconsin, correct. People from Minnesota, you can actually, if you, we would be able to cite and add onto the property taxes unpaid, no matter where they live in Minnesota.
Okay.
You would conceivably, if they live in Ramsey County,
Mhm.
you would send that to Ramsey County, I think, to. As far as the administrative citation process, I've been involved with ordinances where you have various members of city staff empowered to write the citations even. Then there's kind of a truncated process for the guilty party to just pay the fine and be done with it, or appeal to a hearing officer. And it doesn't come up that often that happens. I'm not envisioning a bureaucracy that's gonna grow out of this. Forgetting one other thing I was gonna say about that, but yeah, so that is, the other thing I was gonna say was that then also another part is the defendant or the guilty party has to be able to opt out of this administrative process and go into the regular sort of criminal court process, to deal with the misdemeanor, maybe plead not guilty or what have you. So if they enter into the administrative citation process, then typically they're just gonna pay the fine and be done with it.
How difficult is it to set up?
Not very difficult to be an ordinance, a new ordinance. It's not a land use thing, so it would just come before the city council.
So the maintenance guys could have power of citation or something when they drive by, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Adam gets to do it.
Where I'm more familiar with that is at times you might see that in a nuisance condition, if we had sidewalks everywhere and somebody hadn't plowed their sidewalks. I mean, a lot of times you would have, Public Works or building inspector or somebody of that nature issue an administrative citation.
A code enforcement officer, they call it. Yeah.
Essentially, right, yeah.
Right.
Do we have one of those?
No.
Right there.
I think we've had that discussion.
Everybody's putting somebody else.
Don't open that can of worms tonight.
I think some of the other expenses you were talking about, Dan, would be, you gotta purchase stickers or something to put on the vehicle. And you'd have to have some kind of accounting process if you were actually paying for that permit. And then you'd have to have some kind of a tracking of that accounting, so you issued 12 permits and you got this much money for it.
Yeah. If we were gonna do it, I would probably recommend that at least we set the permit cost just to cover our costs for producing the permits.
Mm-hmm.
And stickers.
You'd also need signage on the property to say, hey, you need a permit to come
Right.
on here. So, and that might
Mhm.
be a big, not a big expense.
Yeah.
Until they
If you
take them
put this
down.
in place here, you could.
Yeah, they'll just take them
apply it
down
other
anyway,
places.
so.
If we put this in place, then at some point, if we wanted, we could apply it to other locations.
Yes, we could.
And other things like junk cars and stuff too, right?
Probably, yeah.
Well, maybe we should work on an ordinance on that.
Now you got our attention.
Yeah, now everybody's got it. Well, is there interest, council, in seeing something written up for us to react to?
I would. I don't wanna close the parking lot, and, you know, this might keep some honest people honest. I mean, the people that are gonna go down there and do it are gonna do it anyhow, but at least it's a step that shows we're trying, so.
Second.
I'm kinda up in the air with, you know, Brandon and Jerry Cusick last week, you know, writing a ticket to a car can get kinda gray sometimes, cause who knows who's driving a car and things, and I don't know.
That's their problem.
Yeah, I guess.
You know, if my kids are taking my car and I'm getting tickets, then I'm gonna have to get on my
Yeah,
kids.
yeah.
I just question whether, how much it's gonna solve his problem.
I
I
don't
guess
think it
then,
will.
and we'll go to all this trouble, and he's
Yeah,
still
you
gonna
know,
have the issue.
I don't think it's not gonna solve the problem. No, I don't think, you know, if the problem's as bad as it is, and, you know, they're taking down signs, or, you know, wrecking things, or doing, you know, a administrative permit isn't gonna stop it.
I like the idea of some sort of administrative enforcement, though. I'm not so sure this parking
Rather
permit's
than
gonna help
like a
anybody.
legal through the sheriff's
Yeah.
office, you mean?
And we can apply it to any number of other situations, so we don't kind of avoid the court system and deal with it locally.
A lot of those end up in court, though, they say.
They can, yeah. Depends on how much the person wants to fight it.
And what would that
It's-
mean for the city, just our
Yeah.
prosecutor to show up that day and,
They would probably end up meeting with the prosecutor initially, you know, kind of pre-prosecution, then before it, you know, went to the
talk to
court.
them out in the hallway?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if it streamlines it and makes it a little bit easier and less expensive for everybody, that might be a good thing.
Yes, that's the way to go.
So you okay with seeing something written up, Jim?
Oh, yeah.
On an administrative citation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, we can think about it and consider how we would apply it to Wind in the Pines.
And
We
then-
need a motion to do that?
And then
No, just bring something back.
and also kind of an analysis of all of the other ramifications of it, the costs involved, and the
Sure.
procedure involved, and the people who would have to be involved. I mean, I would just like to,
A lot of that, I think, is probably addressed in the ordinance. I've looked at a couple administrative citation ordinances.
okay. All right, so we'll look for that then at the next
Motion to
meeting or
adjourn.
So we'll
two.
keep the parking lot open.
Christine?
Excuse me, yes.
I guess, what were the pros and cons of going with the administrative citation just over a regular citation? I guess my only worry with that is there's no it's, a lot of people that I'm dealing with in citing don't really care. And they'll just say, this is what, it's administrative? Oh, it means I don't have to deal with it. Those are my criminals that I'm dealing with, so I guess I like the backbone of a court system to fall back on. And keeping it a criminal offense would be my only thing, so I guess
But,
I'm just asking
yeah.
what are the pros and cons.
I think
Besides
this,
going
you know,
on-
this would really relate to parking enforcement
Okay,
only.
yep,
You
You
would
know,
still,
that's-
you would still have the discretion to write tickets for trespassing and drugs and,
yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I just-
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this
that
is
was my-
purely
no, I know that,
parking.
but-
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to,
We don't wanna go too far with it.
what was that?
We don't wanna go too far with it.
No, right, no, that's what I was wondering,
Mhm.
thank you.
Okay,
We got a motion to adjourn?
I removed.
and we have a second. Any objections? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Any objections?